Chapter 25. We were in the car when I woke. I was curled on Devon's lap as he held me against him. I moved a little, looking up at him. "Alexis?" I asked. "I'm here," she said from the front seat. "What happened?" I asked. "You tell us." Devon looked down at me. His arms were snug around me. "We went to get coffee. We didn't think about needing a guard, we just went for coffee." I repeated. "We know that." I blinked, trying to put together what had happened in a way that made sense. They drugged us. I saw Alexis on the sidewalk, and then I passed out. I woke up in the back of a van, cuffed and chained to the floor. There were 4 men, humans. I don't think they knew we were any different than them. One was in the rear with me, the others in seats near the front. I told them details in short sentences, trying to give them the information I knew they needed but still struggling to make my mind work. The one in the back wanted to have some fun with me, but the boss wouldn't let him. He said they'd been paid to take me and deliver me unharmed. He told the one in the back with me to stop kicking me. "He kicked you?" Devon's voice was angry. I tried to ignore his emotions and my own as I continued. I tried to listen to their thoughts, but I couldn't control it. Whatever they used to knock us out screwed with my control and I gave up. I knew I had to get free. I broke the chain holding my cuffs to the floor. I tried to lift my hands to show them, but Devon stopped me. I kicked the back door open and rolled out. As soon as I stopped rolling, I started running. I don't know how far I ran, but I knew I had to find help before they came back for me. I looked up at Devon again. "How did you find me?" He pulled me tighter against him, and I winced at the pressure on my arms, folded between us. He eased off slightly but still held me snugly. I woke up knowing something was wrong. I didn't know what, but I knew it was something big. Caden came in to get me. He said he'd come out of the shower and found the note that you were gone, and I knew it was you. Something was wrong with you. We threw on clothes and raced after you. When Caden said you'd gone for coffee, I knew where you were headed, so we went in that direction. We found Alexis on the ground, unconscious. You were nowhere in sight. I checked her over and found the dart. Caden added from behind the wheel. Devon called Ridges and let him know that you'd been kidnapped, while I picked Alexis up and we went back for the car. I don't know how, but somehow I knew which direction to find you. We followed that looking for you. Devon added. It didn't take me long to wake up. Alexis put in. Are you all right? I asked. I'm fine. She assured me. They weren't interested in me. I think they only drugged me so they could get away with you without my sounding an alarm. Once I woke, the drug cleared my system fairly quickly. I scowled, my mind was still fuzzy. Why wasn't she as affected as I was? We're almost back to the hotel. She continued. I've already called Ridges back and let him know that we found you. He's going to come up to the room with first aid supplies and a key for those cuffs. She paused for a second. I'll tell him what I can, but he's going to want to talk to you. I can pull over, I said urgently, interrupting myself. I started climbing over Devon, headed for the door even as the car still moved. Caden pulled to the side of the road and came to stop just in time. I threw the door open, keeping one hand on the door. I stretched across the open space and vomited onto the ground. I felt Devon move up behind me. He pulled my hair out of my face and rubbed one hand up and down my back, both reassuring himself I was there and comforting me as my stomach heaved and rolled. I threw up the meager contents of my stomach and sat while we waited for my dry heaves to calm. I sat back in the car and took the tissue that Alexis handed me to clean my face. Are you all right? She asked. I'll be okay. Pull forward a little, Caden. I felt the car move for just a moment before stopping again. Alexis opened her door and got out, only to open the rear door and motion for me to move over. Devon slid back and helped me slide over on the seat to make room for Alexis. She climbed in and closed the door. Caden pulled back onto the road and continued toward the hotel. I closed my eyes and leaned against Devon, trying to concentrate on making my stomach stay where it belonged. I felt Alexis move closer, and I opened my eyes to find her holding her hands barely over my body, her eyes closed, and I knew that she was using her talent. She was either trying to see what was making me so sick, or she was trying to heal me. I wasn't sure which, and it didn't really matter. We made it back to the hotel without having to pull over so I could get sick again. Caden parked near the rear of the hotel, and we used a convenience entrance that kept us from having to walk my bruised, battered, and handcuffed self through the lobby. I leaned heavily against Devon as we rode the elevator and made our way to our room. Up in our suite, Devon led me to the sofa, sat down, and pulled me down into his lap. "I need a shower." I tried to pull away. "I know." He ran his hand over my hair, trying to comfort me. "But Ridges will be here soon with a key for those cuffs. You're lucky you didn't break your wrists when you escaped. Let's not fight them anymore. It'll be easier to shower once they're off," he reasoned. Reluctantly, I nodded, agreeing. I leaned against him, the touch of his skin helping me stay calm. Alexis sat down in one of the chairs nearby and looked at me. "How are you doing?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not good, I feel drunk, very drunk, but worse." She nodded. "And the rest of you? Not just your head?" "I hurt everywhere." "Do you mind if I try something?" "What?" "I'd like to have Caden touch you, nothing big, just skin-to-skin contact." "Okay." I turned and looked at Devon to get his opinion. He looked at me and nodded. I turned back to Alexis. "Let's try it." Caden came close, reaching out one hand toward me. I lifted my arms and gripped his hand like we were to shake hands, but before I could fully clasp his hand in mine, I let go, pulling away to curl into Devon again. "Ah!" I cried out. I felt Devon's arms wrap around me again, holding me close to him. "What is it?" Devon asked, near panic. "It hurt, Devon," Alexis told him. "You had her touch him knowing it would hurt her?" Anger tinting his voice. "You know me better than that, Dev," she admonished. I knew it might hurt, but I needed to know for sure. It wasn't for no reason though, it told me a lot. "What does it mean?" I asked, turning my face from where it had been buried against Devon's neck. "It's not the drugs affecting you like this." "If it's not the drugs, what the hell is it?" Devon asked what I was thinking. "It's several things, the combined effects are making the reaction this severe," she said. I shot her a confused look. The drugs started it, but the emotional trauma of being taken, the physical assault of the drugs, the injuries from the kidnappers and breaking free have thrown your system into an advanced case of separation anxiety. She continued. "Separation anxiety?" Devon asked. Alexis nodded. Milder forms are common in unsealed mates when they don't have some kind of contact regularly. "But we were apart less than 2 hours," Devon said, confused. Alexis nodded. "I know, but there are a lot of other factors contributing here. Not the least of which is how strong your mating bond has gotten." "What do you mean?" Devon asked. "I heard about you growling at Gabriel when you qualified as an enforcer. That's the reaction of someone who's not sealed their mating for a long time," she explained. "Months even. I've only been able to shift for a couple of months." Devon tried to explain it away. Alexis nodded. "You have now, but not then, and I mean a lot of months, 15, 18 or more. So our mating bond is unusually strong," I said. "What does that mean?" Wait, Caden put in from where he stood on one side of the room. I've known a lot of mated couples, but I've never seen anything like this. Even with all the time I've spent in the clinic. That's because most of the matings you've seen are sealed. Sealing changes the bond. What does it mean, though? I asked again. I'm not sure exactly. She admitted. I've heard of reactions like this, but I've never seen one, and never heard of it this early in the relationship. She fell silent for a few seconds, thinking. Devon, you said you woke up knowing something was wrong? Yeah. Devon nodded. That's odd. I've never heard of one half of a couple sensing that the other was in trouble before they'd sealed their mating. Afterward, it's not uncommon. I shifted in my seat. I wanted a shower and to find something else to wear, and I was getting tired of the cuffs still wrapped around my wrists. How long until it passes? I asked. I don't know. Alexis shook her head. I'm at a loss here. I'll make a couple calls, but I don't know if anyone will know. A knock sounded on the door to the suite, startling me. Devon's arms tightened slightly around me, as if he was bracing for someone to try to take me away from him again. Caden glanced at all of us before heading to answer the door. He checked the peephole first, then paused to scent the air. Who is it? He asked. Orrin Ridges. A voice came through the heavy wood. Caden turned back to us. I've never met him. Can one of you confirm it's him? Alexis stood easily and joined Caden at the door. She didn't bother to look out, instead scenting the air. It's Mr. Ridges, his enforcer, and someone else, I don't know who. You're not alone. I know you have your enforcer with you, but who's the third? Caden asked, still not opening the door. I brought my personal physician. I thought he might be useful, replied the cultured voice of the local leader. Caden looked at Alexis, who nodded acceptance, and stepped behind Caden before he opened the door. The man that stepped in the door first was nearly as tall as Caden, but he was broader. He had well-tanned skin and wore a carefully neutral expression on his face. I recognized him as Bennett, Mr. Ridge's personal enforcer. He stepped inside and looked around the room, stiffening slightly as his eyes rested on Caden. You four are the only ones here? He asked. We are, Alexis said, from behind Caden. The Aniquitos stepped into the room next, followed by a smaller man. The newcomer was almost tiny when compared to the three men standing near him, but he was likely no shorter than 5 feet 10 inches. He carried a black leather messenger bag slung across his body, so his hands were free. This is Morgan, he's our PAX healer. From what your Harmonia said when she called, I thought he might be able to help. The Aniquitos started to step into the room, only to be stopped by Bennett, whose eyes were still on Caden. The pack leader glanced at his enforcer and followed his gaze to Caden. We didn't meet you, he said. The implication that he should have was clear. Alexis stepped closer. This is Caden, he's my enforcer. Considering my position and that I'm our pack's only healer, I rarely do much without him. He travels with me and goes with me when I have to treat someone. We didn't bring him in to meet you because I thought it would be disrespectful for us to bring 2 of our pack's enforcers into your office. She didn't lie while trying to pacify him. We could have brought him instead of Devon when I met you, but I thought you might want to talk to Devon about his circumstances. The Aniquitos was silent for a few seconds, considering her words before nodding once. Logical. We weren't hiding him, he was in the building, he just stayed in the waiting area while we met with you. He seemed to be weighing the truth of the words. Whether it was one of his talents or he was considering what his other senses told him, I don't know. He looked back to Bennett. It's all right, he told his guard before moving around him into the middle of the room. Alexis stepped forward. Please have a seat, she invited. Can I get you anything to drink? She played the hostess perfectly. I'm good. Ridges replied while the other men simply shook their heads. Does someone have a key for these? I lifted my hands up to show off the cuffs. Bennett came forward, a small key appearing in his hand. Give the key to Devon, Alexis said. Don't touch her, please. Bennett's hand changed direction, dropping the key into Devon's upturned hand. I twisted my arm so Devon could reach the locks. Why couldn't he just unlock them? Morgan asked, a crease forming on his brow. Devon deftly unlocked the cuffs, and dropped both the cuffs and the key onto the table in front of the sofa. I fought the urge to rub the abused and purpled skin where the cuffs had been, knowing that touching it would only make them hurt more. It seems she's in an advanced state of separation anxiety, and skin contact with anyone but Devon is very painful for her. Alexis sat on the edge of the couch beside me. Give me your arms, she said softly. I held my arms out toward her, and she carefully wrapped a cool, damp washcloth around the marks on each wrist, careful not to touch my skin as she worked. The cool cloth helped a burning sensation in my skin. I lowered my hands back to my lap and shifted slightly, burrowing myself closer to Devon. What happened exactly? The Aniquitos asked. Alexis spoke first. Nickie and I were going for coffee. Alone? We were together, but we didn't have either of the guys with us, if that's what you mean. She answered. It never occurred to us that anyone would be after us. We weren't meeting with anyone or interacting with any kitsune. We didn't see a reason to wait when we could go get it and be back in just a few minutes. We're used to a lot more freedom than this, she explained. The Aniquitos nodded. We were about halfway down the block when everything went black. I woke up with Caden carrying me. Nickie was gone. We came back to the hotel to get the car. We followed some sense of Devon's on what direction to go. We found her several miles away. She'd already escaped. That's when I called you. She turned to Devon. That sense of where to find her is another thing I've never heard of in unsealed matings, she said, as if it had just occurred to her, and she didn't want to forget it. The Aniquitos turned to me. What can you tell me? I gave him a short version of the events of the morning, adding, they were human. As far as I could tell from the way they treated me and what they used to tie me down, they had no clue I was anything but human. But someone was paying them. He watched me for a moment. Do you know of anyone who would want to kidnap you? Not offhand, I replied. Have you had any trouble with anyone recently? He asked. I turned and looked at Devon, meeting his eyes. You tell him, I said, not wanting to go into it. We've both had a bit of trouble at home. We've got some kids who formed an elitist group. They think that anyone who didn't shift on their own or at a normal age is inferior, and straight humans are even worse, with the possible exception of Nickie for some reason. We've both been harassed by the group. Me because I was a non-shifter, then the way I shifted. Her because of her association with me. I've heard of groups like that. As far as I'm aware, we don't have any of them here. Is that all? Unfortunately, no. Her best friend since childhood was a kitsune, though she didn't know it. For years, though, he knew what she was, and under our Aniquitos' direction, he watched out for her. He was there when she shifted the first time. I don't understand why this is a problem. Because after I shifted, Brandon suddenly seemed to think I was his. That I was his mate. I spoke up. He changed in ways I wasn't willing to put up with. I asked him over and over to leave me alone. Bill stepped in and punished him more than once. I fell silent. A few weeks ago, it got to the point that it couldn't be overlooked any longer, and our Aniquitos banished him. Ah. The local leader nodded. Do you know where he is now? I shook my head. No idea, Bill might or his folks, but I have no clue. I felt Devon shake his head as well. Do you think he could be behind this? I'd like to say no, that Brandon wouldn't do this, but honestly, the Brandon I knew seems to be gone, and I couldn't begin to predict what this one might do. Have you contacted Bill yet? The local leader wanted to know. Not yet, Alexis said. I wanted to speak with you first. Deal with more immediate concerns and get a good idea of Nickie's condition before I contact him. He's not going to be happy, and the more information I can give him, the better it'll be. The older man nodded, understanding. I'd appreciate it if you'd let Morgan take a look at her, if you don't mind. Anything you need, let me know and I'll see that you get it. I don't mind if he looks at her, as long as he can do it without touching her. I don't know how long her skin sensitivity will last, but I know that irritating it will only make her recovery take longer. Alexis said. Morgan lifted the strap of his bag over his head and sat it to one side before approaching me. I was unconcerned and remained relaxed against Devon, taking comfort in his nearness and his touch. Morgan pushed the sofa table away from the sofa and moved into the gap. He sank down to sit on his heels, his hands hovering barely off my skin as he held them over my hands in my lap. He closed his eyes while he worked. After a moment, he tilted his head to one side and a crease formed between his eyes as if he'd found something strange. He opened his eyes and pulled his hands away slightly as he spoke to Devon. Would you mind moving away from him for a moment? He asked, his voice soft, gentle. I'd like to take a look without the two of you touching. I glanced at Alexis, saw her nod and turned to Devon. I met his eyes and silently nodded. I got off Devon's lap and moved to sit few inches away. Not far, just so that we were no longer touching. I turned back to the man crouched in front of the sofa. Morgan again held his hands just over me and closed his eyes. The crease between his eyes deepened. He pulled back again and twisted until he could see Alexis. You're a healer too, right? He asked. When she nodded, he continued. Have you ever seen this? She looked confused. Seen what? You checked her, right? Of course. Were they touching? Yeah, she said, thinking just a second. From the time we found her until you asked them not to, I think the only time there hasn't been some contact between the two of them was when she scrambled across the car to throw up. Morgan looked concerned. She got sick? Alexis nodded. In the car on the way back, we barely had time to pull over. He said. Come over here and look now. Tell me what you see. Alexis moved around behind the sofa and reaching over the back, she held her hands over my shoulders. After a few moments, she pulled them back and let them fall onto the back of the sofa on either side of my head. That's strange, she said. Let's try something. Devon, I'm going to check her again. I want you to wait a couple of minutes and then touch her. It doesn't have to be anything big, any skin-to-skin contact will do. Beside me, Devon nodded. Is this okay with you, Nickie? She asked. It's fine. I'd like to see it too, if you don't mind. Morgan said. It's fine. I said again, not really caring. From the corners of my eyes, I saw Alexis's hands settle just above my shoulders again, as Morgan once more extended his over my lap. The two of them were quiet for a moment when I felt Devon shift beside me. His hand brushed against my arm. I waited a moment before I shifted one hand slightly, intending to take Devon's hand, but I accidentally brushed my hand against Morgan's instead, sending a shocking wave of pain through my entire body. Oh shit. I scrambled to the end of the sofa and passed. I ran through the bedroom, barely making it into the bathroom before my stomach started heaving again. I bent over the commode, unable to stop the convulsions racking my stomach. Devon was only a few steps behind me. He gently pulled my hair away from my face and held it back, running one hand up and down the bare skin of my arm. His touch helped to calm my system, but it was still several minutes before the heaving stopped.